My name is Paul Michelle. I'm the lead pastor here at the River in Forsyth, Missouri, and we'd like to take this opportunity to give you just a glimpse of who we are and what we're about. At the River, we exist to inspire and enable people to become fully devoted followers of Jesus for real and for life. The Bible tells us in Matthew 22 that when pressed by a lawyer, Jesus said the most important aspect of life is to love God and love people with all you've got. In today's fast-paced culture of isolation and division, we passionately believe that a relationship with God and with people are both so worth fighting for. Jesus is our passion, our obsession, and our motivation. Because Christ gave His all on Calvary, we give our best every day. We believe the church should be a beautiful expression of its people. We have been gifted to give, wired for work, and saved to serve. We don't just go to church, we are the church. Jesus didn't leave His followers with a religion. He left them with a mission. And our mission is to spread this Jesus movement everywhere we go and to the ends of the earth. We are the light in the darkness. If you're looking for a place to belong, a place to grow, a place to serve, please join us every Sunday at 9 and 11 a.m. Help us to inspire and enable people to become fully devoted followers of Jesus for real and for life.
On our webpage and on our Facebook, and just an opportunity. We wanted to give people, as they're kind of checking things out and they're curious about our church, they can see what it looks like and what they'll experience and when they come here.
You look good, man. Way to go.
Cool.
That's good.
Yeah, thanks.
Kind of smooth.
It's fun.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I try. Hey, so we've got Fall Fest coming up. Fall Fest is a great opportunity for us to go and hang around a campfire, enjoy the fall weather. And so we've got that coming up November 6th on a Sunday. We'll start at 4:30 and then go to dark. And some people have asked, like, where is that? It's just down the road on East 76, just past Kirbyville Middle School. On the left, it used to be a web writing academy. Now it's Busy Bee. And so you'll see it there. You'll see all of our cars there. You'll see we'll have a blow-up
Bounce house.
Bounce house, thank you. For kids, for adults to hang on to, for kids to bounce in. And so, yeah, it's a really good time. It's always a good time. Today, after service, we have
Connect class. So we've talked about this for several weeks. I teach that class, and again, I hope that doesn't scare you off, but it's right after this service. We're going to set up some tables. We've got some ladies that cook some amazing food. And really the point of that is for you to kick the tires. If you have questions about why we do what we do, then you need to come. Even if you didn't sign up, weeks past or whatever, just show up. Come have a conversation with us. This is the best way for us to kind of answer all those questions about what do we prioritize and why. So that'll be in and out in a couple of, probably an hour and some change. But yeah, it's easy. So just show up if you haven't signed up.
Yeah, sounds good. We can't wait for that. Hey, today Pastor Colin wraps up our What to Do When Life Sucks series. We won't get to say that anymore. It's
probably okay.
Yeah, probably is. 3 weeks was probably long enough to say the word sucks from the stage. So, but yeah, an incredible message in the first service. I can't wait for them to hear what God has laid on your heart to bring to us today. And then next week, we start a new series called Faith Over Fear for the whole month of October that we're excited about. So check this out.
morning. Man, I know that they don't do it for the applause, but man, that worship team, they just have their stuff together. So this morning, good morning. It's great to be here. It's great to be worshiping with you. Happy fall. It seems like that happened, right? It's kind of funny. Sometimes it's gradual and it kind of strings itself out. But this year it was Thursday. Thursday was fall. I don't know if you paid attention to the weather. Wednesday was summer. Thursday, fall, which happened to land on the equinox, so yay, science, right? So, except for yesterday, but we'll give it a pass on that one. Now, there's an ongoing feud. Some of you guys are Facebook friends with some of the people that go to our church. There's this feud about which is better, summer or fall. So I thought I'd go ahead and clear the air. I'd done a lot of research on this. I looked at the comments, some third-party tested information, and I'm happy to announce it was close, but fall won. So good job, fall. It's my opinion, but I have a microphone, so something like matters more than yours right now. So fall is great. We love fall. It's just amazing that it's here is kind of my deal. This summer kind of zipped for the Lyerla family. I'm Colin Lyerla. It's nice to meet all of you. And so this summer was fast, and what we found ourselves is that this summer when we were planning on what to do as far as our sermon series for the fall and all that, and Paul and I were looking at it, and I was gone a lot, and about every 2 weeks we were taking, my wife and I, Amy, we were taking students somewhere. So camps, and then we took another trip. And so just a few weeks ago when I was putting together this message, I was actually in a tour bus with a bunch of students driving through Europe. And so I remember I was reading in Genesis, which is where we will be today. So if you have a Bible or your phone or whatever, we're going to be in Genesis 37. So we'll start there in a minute. We're going to be looking at the story of Joseph. And I'm reading this and the things that I'm learning from it and my own kind of take on some of this stuff. So really it's just a lot of the things that I feel like God has taught me in the last few weeks. Now, on these educational tours that we take, we always go through like all these historical sites and monuments and museums and all of that. And the one thing that we see a lot of that I don't really think that we see a lot of in our everyday is art. Like we see a ton of art on this trip, sculptures and murals and statues and etc. Now, one of my last days on trip, we went to the Louvre Museum, which is in Paris, France. The Louvre, if you're not familiar, it's like massive. Probably the largest packed wall-to-wall museum of its kind. There's 5 floors of the Louvre. And each of them, they say if you spent 30 seconds in front of every artifact there, or piece of art or whatever, that you would have to be there for 200 days to see it all. Like, it is huge. So I'm a history guy. I'm not really an art guy. But I appreciate art for its historical aspects, like the significance of some of them. I recognize some artists and paintings, like, for instance, the Mona Lisa is there. I know that one, right? We were walking around on one of the floors, my wife and I looked at one. I'm like, oh, this one's really pretty. I wonder who's singing, looks at, and I look over, and it's Claude Monet. I'm like, oh, yeah, I've heard of him. So you don't need an art degree to know some of this. But really, essentially, this is our second time walking around in the Louvre, my wife and I, and so we decided to just take it floor by floor. So we went all the way to the top floor and started looking through it. Now, this may not sound exciting to you, but it was Northern European and French paintings. Believe it or not, the kids get jacked up. Yeah. But the kids get jacked up about it. Like, you'll see them, and they'll be like, this is so cool. And it's just like a bunch of paintings, and it's quiet. And it's a little bit of a head-scratcher why they like it so much. But my wife and I were walking around, and I'm more or less ignorant of all of the, like, technical art styles and that kind of stuff. So we're just walking around looking for things that are pretty, like pretty basic stuff. But I was looking, and I happened to see this one. So for me, like, any guesses as to what's being represented here? Well, for me, I didn't know at first, so I started looking at it, and there was another painting that was close to it. This is a depiction of Genesis where Jacob is being shown Joseph's bloody coat. So I'd just been reading the story and studying it right before that, and we saw this, and so this is a Rembrandt. You've heard that one before, maybe in a movie about them stealing stuff from art museums. But I thought this was really cool, the way that God kind of brought that to my attention amidst all of the other thousands of artworks there. So here's what I learned walking around the Louvre. I don't get art. I don't get it. That's a really expensive, and I just don't understand why anyone would waste their time or money on such a thing. Now, some of the things that I saw in there were cool looking, but this one, it's like, is this just like a doodle? Was he bored in church? And just started drawing things on the back of. And so I have similar things that my kids have done that are probably better than that one, if I'm being straight up about it. So it doesn't make sense to me. My simple mind, I just want to know what it is, right? Like, crazy thought, I just want the paintings to look like what they're supposed to look like. Like this one. There's a second one. Now, this one I get behind a little bit. This is the same scene. It's in Genesis. Saw this one in the Louvre as well. This is a picture of Jacob, who's on the right, and he's being shown this. And so we'll talk about this story just a little bit here today. But honestly, I don't know why people would waste their time on this. Now, that's because my favorite painter of all time is Bob Ross. Now, do you know what this is? It's a mountain. Nailed it, right? Like, I've never looked at a Bob Ross painting and thought, I wonder what he's thinking here. I know exactly what he's thinking. That's a mountain. How cool is that, right? So just make the mountain look like a mountain. It doesn't have to have all these deep-leveled thoughts. But as I was walking around, I didn't see any of Bob's stuff in the Louvre, right? Bob's stuff is straightforward. Like, if you want to know the meaning of something, there it is. Now, when stuff's vague, I'm out. I'm nervous. I feel like I'm going to get it wrong if there's some sort of interpretation to be had. Like when my wife answers questions like this. Sure, do whatever you want. I don't think that's what she means, right? There's some interpretation behind that I think I'm going to mess up if I really take it at face value. So, ladies, don't do this to us, okay? We're going to mess it up. We just need you to be clear. I like things to be clear. I like them to be clear in art. I like them to be clear in life. And so when we start looking at the things that happen to us in life, sometimes I think they're really weird stuff that is almost like abstract in my life. I'm looking at events and things and just in my recollection of, man, how on earth does that fit? Like, if I'm learning about perseverance, if I'm learning about patience, okay, just show me that, right? Like, tell me on the front side. I just want to know it. I want Bob Ross clarity for the seasons in my life, right? Oftentimes I feel like I get Vincent van Gogh level clarity. Like, everything is melting for no reason and the artist is clearly on drugs. So, like, when it comes to a little art joke for you there, right? So I want to be able to tell what God's up to. He's the artist. He's the author of what is going on. I want to know what the meaning is behind what's happening. Now, this morning we're going to take a super practical approach to this question of our series, what to do when life sucks. Because life, man, it'll suck the life right out of you sometimes, won't it? So last week we were gone. We were traveling, and I was back home with my family and visiting. Nothing will suck the life out of you faster than that. I'm just kidding. Don't agree to that. My wife or my mom watches these, so I just want to make sure and clarify that we had a great time. Sorry. And so when we were back there was some things that happened. Some of the stuff that we were doing while we were there that just lined up so interestingly when it comes to this message. I was working and finishing my message there. And it felt very clear that God was pressing on me this message of, like, the seasons of change. It's weird to say that, like, God was bringing ideas, right? Like, it's a kind of an odd statement, but man, it happens. Like, multiple ways that are there's no way that they're connected. This happens with Paul and I all the time when we're talking about sermons and things like that, like, even though it sounds odd, like, God shows up sometimes in so many different ways. Like, for me, he knows me, and it's not even subtle sometimes, right? Like, he will show me multiple seasons. So this is like this idea of seasons. This is how God laid it out for me. First of all, we were traveling back to go to a festival of the changing of seasons. Second, my kids were all, like, there, and it's apparent that the seasons have changed for my children. They are now entering into a season called teenage. Lord help us. It was just different. Like, when they used to play and just want to go do stuff, like, that's not really the thing. So seasons are changing, and it was apparent while we were there, okay? Also, I'm in a Bible plan. I use my Bible app, and in that Bible plan, it's a go through the Bible, and we just happened to be talking for the last 2 weeks. It was all about seasons of change and seasons of this and that. And so to top it all off, we're back home, and we went to church at one of the churches, the Vine Church in Carbondale, Illinois, and we loved going there. And the pastor was talking about Genesis. He was talking about seasons, and he mentioned specifically Joseph. And when he did that, my wife and I both looked at each other because I'd just been talking about this sermon, and we both just kind of shook our heads. So this is how I like for God to show me things. I like this level of clarity. Now, in the book of Ecclesiastes, the author lays out life like seasons. And I'm telling you, there's nothing that is more wise and profound and really meaningful than thinking about the things that come in and out of our lives as seasons. So a time to be born, a time to die, time to heal, a time to kill. Like, there's no better way to describe it. So seasons are often figurative when we talk about them in this sense, but man, if you have kids in sports, they are quite literal, right? There's a season for this and that, and sometimes those seasons, they leave you running around in circles, right? Seasons can seem quick. They can feel like they last forever, like it being 90 stinking degrees in September. It's just not okay, Move on. There are seasons that feel lonely. There are seasons that oftentimes feel like you're in a cycle and it is not going to end. It is going to run its course and run you into the ground. So there are moments when we need an answer to this question, what to do when life sucks. And there's no story in the Bible, in my opinion, that better represents the answer for this question is the story of Joseph. So if you're not familiar with that story this morning, I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes. I would encourage you to read it. So the story starts off, he's the favorite son born to Jacob. It's very clear in this that he, in the story that he goes through, he's the great-grandson of Father Abraham, so he's got some pedigree there. But this story has just these crushing setbacks and then these moments of like unbelievable restoration. And I love it for me. And I hope to share these parts that I love for me because that is what I need to hear. I need to see that even though that I don't understand what God's plan is, it doesn't mean that he doesn't have one. If you've ever felt that way, then you're sitting in the right seats this morning. So Genesis 37, 3 and 4 is where we're going to start. It'll be up here on the screen. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So, interesting how the story jumps right in with now Israel, this is Jacob after his name change, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. So, for all the parents here, like, we've all got one, right? Like, but this is a pretty bold strategy to just tell your kids which one it is, right? So in this, at least tell them something vague like, oh, I don't have any favorites. I love all of you. Like nobody is buying that, but it keeps the peace at least, right? And so when we talk about playing favorites and all of that, why don't we? Why don't we just throw it out there? Well, I like this one the best. It's not wise. It creates tension between your kids. Now, Joseph, clearly the favorite. And if you look at the story that you're in, even his father even made him a shirt to show everybody, right? I know it was a robe, but you get what I'm saying. While that might have seemed cool for Joseph for a little bit when he's young, man, it didn't do him any favors. So here's my first point. There's a reason for the season. Don't get too excited. We're not talking about Christmas. But just 2 verses into this story of Joseph, the tides are already shifting against him, aren't they? And it starts because of someone else's actions. If anything, this is a sin on his father's part, right? The favoritism, he shows his son overt favoritism, and it creates a tension and then a hatred, and that hatred will serve as the catalyst for Joseph's really rough season that we're going to get into. And then Joseph makes it worse. Verse 5. Joseph had a dream, and we told it to his brothers. They hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. Don't do it, right? We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, and when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of this dream and what he had said. So sometimes the difficult seasons in your life are a result of someone else's actions. And sometimes they're because of your own. There's plenty of things that I've done that have made things worse for myself, being foolish or prideful, rebellious. Like, I think we've all done that, and we've all kind of relate with that moment of making things worse for yourself. It's the moment when we do what we want to do without consulting anything about what he might want us to do. That's going to end poorly 100% of the time. In fact, like, we've all been there, right? We bought that shirt. We don't want to go back. That's the reason you're at church. That's the reason we subject ourselves to this, is because you have gone through something in your life and you don't want to go back. You don't want to look backwards. You want the past to remain in the past. And so when we look at this, we've got to remember this, that in these seasons, sometimes our own foolishness can make things worse. But no matter the season that we are in, there's a reason for it. So Joseph makes things harder for himself by talking about this dream he had, but to kind of get into this a little bit, like, here's what I want you to think about. When he talks about his dream to his brothers, that's not a sin, right? Like, he's not even really being foolish. You look at the character of Joseph, read the book, read the story. His character he's being earnest. He's saying, I don't really understand. Listen to this dream I had. And from that, as a result, he's hated and he's chastised. So in this, like, why did God even give him the dreams in the first place, right? Well, at this point in the story, I don't think Joseph has the answers that he's looking for here. So this story that he starts talking about, it lands him in a mess. So the quick version of this is that his brothers toss around the idea of just killing him, get rid of him. They decide that's not the thing to do, so instead they fake his death and sell him into slavery, and this chain of events result in him in slavery in Egypt next to Potiphar. So Potiphar is one of Pharaoh's guys, and we read on in Genesis 39:4. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. So this becomes this theme in Joseph's life that I want us to look at this morning. No matter the circumstances he's in, no matter how hopeless it seems, when it's unfair and when it's uncomfortable and when it's hard, he stays, one, true to what God wants him to do, and two, he treats the people around him well. Because, our second point, there's a someone in the season. Like, different people in the story all take notice of the way that Joseph treats them. Like he is doing what God is calling him to do with Potiphar. He's doing what God is calling him to do with Potiphar's wife. So in this story, if you're familiar with it, again, like, Potiphar's wife takes notice of him for different reasons, which he's described as handsome in this scripture, and then all of a sudden he's propositioned by Potiphar's wife, and it's a bad situation. It's just the two of them, and he handles the situation as appropriately and correctly as possible in the moment that he's in, and he gets thrown in prison for it. So he did what he was supposed to do, and she did what was wrong. It was totally sinful. Her sin results in pain and anguish for him. Like, in that moment, think about it. He's a slave. And he denies himself what we'll call some really easily accessible comfort. And in that, even though he handles it correctly, he respects her in her sin. She was wrong. He still treated her fairly and treated her well. Guys, that is powerful. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ in a nutshell. We see it all throughout Scripture. In Genesis, she does not deserve to be treated with respect, but he does it anyway because there is someone in the season. Now, while he's in prison, the prison warden, the royal cupbearer, the royal baker are all drawn to Joseph because of this. He treats them well in moments when they don't deserve it or when they don't have anything to offer him. Reading on in verse 6, when Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" So they're in prison. First of all, I think this is a pretty obvious answer. So let's kind of get past that one, right? They're in prison. What this shows is that Joseph is caring for them. He is taking notice of them. He's loving them because, secondly, he's in prison too. He is in the fire, yet he sets himself off to the side to notice them. At this point, those people don't have anything to offer Joseph. His kindness, his notice, his helpfulness, all of it, it could be for nothing. But if you follow the story, it's at this moment, this exchange where he extends kindness to people that can't readily help him. These strangers in a dungeon that don't really have anything to offer him, that is what brings him out of this season and into the presence of the most powerful man and the only one that can help him in Egypt. So whatever the storms that you're in right now, whatever the season it feels like you are fighting through right now, whether you're hurt and you're tired, or whether you feel rested and ready for whatever God has for you next, understand that there is someone in that season. There is someone who you will encounter. Like, they will be there to teach you something, or they will need you to teach them something, or they will be preparing you. And guys, it's usually the one that's kind of challenging. You know that guy? Hopefully it's not me. The person that challenges you. It is a challenge to find the energy and the love in your heart to treat them the way that God calls you to treat them. We all have one of those. And the way you treat them, it matters. It matters because people always matter to God. So our responsibility is to treat them like Jesus would treat them, regardless of our circumstance. Man, this exact idea, it blows me away when I start thinking about the people that you just randomly walk by sometimes, and how God and how Jesus, he notices those people. And it's this exact kindness that the cupbearer, eventually he remembers. Years later, Joseph gets called out of the bullpen, and God gives him the ability to interpret Pharaoh's dream. So this story is fairly short. You have the outline in your notes. If you want to read it this week, I would call you to do that because there's so many things that we just don't have time to pick on the individual little details of how beautiful this story is. But in a sense, God gives him this vision of the dream. The dream shows him that there's seasons coming. There's a season of famine. There's a season of feast. And so in Genesis 41:39, after the interpretation, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and as wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." I love how all of these things intersect in this moment, all these themes, because Joseph finds himself, because of his faithfulness to God, once again in a position of favor. Verse 41, "So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger, and he put it on Joseph's finger, and he dressed him in robes of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck." From favorite to betrayed, to slave, to prisoner, to in charge of the entire country. Those are some Missouri-style seasons right there, aren't they? Twists and turns in this story. And something that hits me is, couldn't Joseph have skipped all of the middle part, the hard part? I mean, Joseph interprets dreams. It's this thing, right? 6 times in the story, 6 instances, he's given a vision of what's going to happen in the future. So why didn't he dream about his captivity? Why didn't he dream about those times in prison? For somebody that goes down in history as a dream interpreter, a visionary leader, you would have thought that maybe he could have seen some of that coming. If you're a Christian, here's the hardest part. Here's the one that you are going to have a hard time swallowing, because I do too. It's that for us, we have to come to terms with the fact that there is a purpose in the hard parts. For us to become who God calls us to be, sometimes that means things are going to suck sometimes. If Joseph could have just skipped the pain and gone right to the palace, man, things would have been a lot more comfortable for him. He would have had a lot easier story. The story would have been shorter, right? But would he have been ready for what's next? The dreams that God gives Joseph didn't make sense until they made sense. Look back at this verse in the first part, at the dreams he has as a teen. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out of the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" Man, if Joseph had known his story, he probably would have answered that question a lot like most of us would have answered this question when we were teenagers. Funny you ask, like, I will literally rule you. Bow down. Like, the story is known. He didn't know what the dream meant then because he wasn't ready to know what the dream meant then. None of it made sense until it made sense. Famine strikes the land, they become desperate, and his brothers go searching for grain to survive. Chapter 42, verse 6. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. And Joseph, who's an adult now, who's faced some seasons of being uprooted, some seasons of weeping, some seasons of mourning and being torn down, he stands before his brothers with total realization that this dream has come true. Total realization that God is building a masterpiece in his life, and in that moment, he doesn't use that opportunity to drive his brothers into the ground. Instead, he treats them like family. Family. And sure, it had to have been awkward conversations after that. I'm sure that there was mixed feelings, bitterness, and resentment for what they had done. But at this point, Joseph had lived long enough to realize that this was a new season. He is doing something new. A season of harvest, of gathering together, of love, of mending of relationships. And for Joseph's story, we get to see all of that. We have the bird's eye view on this like a Bob Ross Mountain masterpiece. So when we see his story, like, understand that the details of it, like, there's so many little instances and cool things that God does, but in the middle of the mess, Joseph in a cistern in the wilderness that his brothers had thrown him in. They're talking about killing him above this pit, or when he's in the prison cell for something he didn't do. In those moments, all Joseph had to hold on to was that God had a purpose in the season. I don't know why. If you look at this story, I don't know why we have to face hard things, but understand that our hope is that from stories like this one, that we have hope that there's a purpose for the season. So Joseph has this moment, right? Like, he has his day when all of the promises are revealed. He's reunited with his family and happily ever after. Not exactly. But for a lot of us in this room, like, we haven't had that moment yet, have we? A little over 10 years ago, my stepmom, Sandra Faye Lyerla, she was diagnosed with a rare bone marrow disease called myelofibrosis. She basically, her body was fighting its own ability to grow red blood cells. She and my dad, they fought it tooth and nail. They got multiple second, third opinions. They saw specialists and tried alternative methods, and she was doing blood transfusions to keep her healthy. And we prayed, and we fasted, and we prayed over her, and we asked for healing. And despite all of it, she passed away on March the 2nd, 2013. She was 55. Sandra was kind. She was selfless. She was an encourager. She treated people well. She was a woman of God and a woman of integrity. And she, even when things got really hard at the end for her physically, she never lost her faith that God was good and that he was in control. And almost 10 years later, if I'm being honest, I still don't know why that she was taken from us. Like there are things that happen to all of us that leave us in this moment of, man, why does that happen? Things that seem meaningless, that we can't possibly see the meaning behind it. But here's what I know: no matter how dark it seems, no matter how bad it seems, there is a someday to the season. A someday. There always is. No matter how long the season seems, even if it feels depressing and hopeless and defeating, the seasons always change. The dawn, it always breaks, the leaves always fall, the frost, it always bites, and the spring always brings new growth, and there will be a time of flourishing again. It's beautiful. But we sometimes can't see the beauty in it because we're in it. But the promise is that there's a someday to the season. I still don't know why my kids don't get to have my stepmom in their lives. But I know that there's a reason. And your life, it doesn't look like mine. It doesn't look like anyone's. It's yours. But to truly understand what you're facing, you have to tap into the power of the only person that could truly understand all the details of your story, and it's the living Son of the highest God, Jesus Christ. That formation of a relationship with him, he knows. He knows how hard it is. He knows the anguish. He knows the pain. He knows because he felt it. Willingly put on flesh to come live with us here, to experience the things that we experience. He knows. And most importantly, he knows exactly the purpose behind what you are facing. So when you look at your story and you think that things don't fit, and you think that, man, chaotic, painful, random senselessness, understand that we may not understand, but he does. He's an artist. He's a creator. He built us for something. He's shaping us, and he's forming us into something for the someday in our season. In Ecclesiastes, the author writes of seasons: a time to plant, a time to harvest, a time to tear down, a time to build up, a time to cry, a time to laugh. Different seasons for different things. And then it says this: he has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. He's the creator, masterful artist and author. And listen, if things feel heavy for you right now, just look right here. If things feel heavy for you, if they seem hopeless, if they seem like there's no possible outcome, it's hard. I get it. But remember that there's a someday to your season. Storms and season, they can suck the life right out of us. And there's a phrase you hear a lot of, well, this too shall pass, seasons pass. And while that might feel cheap, understand at the end of all seasons, at the end of your life, at the end of mine, at the end of this current age that we live in, we have a mighty God who sent his Son to pay the price for all sin, and we are guaranteed that he will finish the work that he started. That is a guarantee of the someday. And here's the only way that you can possibly make left or right, that you can possibly understand and make sense of the season that you are in. It's the only way that Jacob understood. It's the only way that his son Joseph, or Solomon, the author of Ecclesiastes, or Paul, Michelle, or myself, or any of you can possibly make sense of all of the craziness of the things that happen in your life. It's through a relationship with Jesus. It's the only thing that sustained Joseph in the prison, in the cistern. So if you feel a pull on your heart this morning, that is on purpose. It's called the Holy Spirit. It's not freaky. It's just him inviting you into something more. And that's where you need to start. I want to close our time this morning with prayer. So if you would please bow your heads. God, we sit before you humbled at how intentional and amazing and beautiful and crazy this life is. If only there was just a formula for us to understand the things. If only it was so straightforward and simple some as Joseph's story. But God, we were reminded this morning that in Joseph's story, it seemed crazy. God, sustain us. There are people in this room that are going through things that are unthinkable, who have gone through things that are painful. And as those memories are drudged up, God, I pray that you give them peace. That there's a someday to that pain. There's a someday where we will see the reason for the things that happen to us. If there's anyone in this room that doesn't have a relationship with you, I just pray that this week you start badgering them about forming one, about getting to know you, Jesus, and the things that you did and how that can transform lives and it can change generations like it did in this story. We love you, we thank you, and it's all in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I grew up in a church where we always did like altar calls and there was music and the people came up and we do that sometimes. Can I just be authentic for a minute? Like, I'm Colin. If you need to talk about any of this, I would love to have that conversation with you. Paul is awesome at having that conversation. It's not magic. It's a relationship with your Creator. And while that might sound weird to a lot of people, it doesn't sound weird to me. It doesn't sound weird to Paul. That is how we were created, is to have a relationship with Him that is meaningful and moving. So if you are feeling that this morning, we're not going to embarrass you. I don't want you to come up here and feel like you have to do anything or go through anything. You just have to have a conversation. So if that's not this Sunday, make sure it's the next. It's awesome to get to worship with you guys this morning. It was really good to have you all here today. We'll see you guys next week when we start our next series.